On paper, Star Trek Voyager Across the Unknown seems simple. Mission, combat, crew, next sector. But anyone who has tried playing on autopilot knows the truth. This game punishes haste, punishes lazy decision-making, and above all, punishes those who think they can improvise in the middle of the unknown. And that is exactly why today's video is for you. I've put together 10 advanced tips that change how you read every encounter, manage your crew, and turn seemingly lost situations into clean victories. No obvious advice like maintain ship integrity here. This is the kind of stuff you only learn after failing miserably, or after someone shows you the shortcut. So if you want to stop just barely surviving and start controlling the pace of the campaign, stay with me. Here are 10 things you need to know in Star Trek Voyager Across the Unknown. This tip of researching the tech tree by tiers, completing the entire tier 1 before moving to tier 2, and so on, is the kind of thing that looks too neat on paper, but in practice, it makes the game much smoother to manage. You stop wasting points on shortcuts that only look good in the menu, and start building a solid foundation of upgrades that actually unlock your run's momentum. It aligns with what the game itself emphasizes. Technology in the tree unlocks passive improvements, new rooms, and upgrades. But research costs science points and takes time. So optimizing the order is literally gaining efficiency in what limits you most at the start. I like this approach because it creates a sense of constant progress. You finish tier 1 and feel that Voyager has become functional, instead of having a bunch of half measures scattered across various tabs. Since the tree is divided into categories, like science, engineering, crew, and later even Borg, it's very tempting to drop a point here and there, but that usually delays the moment the game truly starts rewarding you with strong, consistent ship options. In my mind, the secret isn't just prioritizing tier 1, it's doing it with discipline. This avoids that classic strategy game mistake, investing early in higher tier items and ending up without the support, economy, or stability to handle the hits of the next sector. The game makes it clear that researching is a central path to strengthening the ship and even affects morale and build style. So the sooner you unlock the indispensable basic package, the sooner you can choose paths with confidence instead of constantly putting out fires. When you cite a concrete example like reaching max warp core by Sector 9, it becomes the icing on the cake because the audience immediately understands it's not abstract advice. It's a way to reach the performance ceiling of the campaign faster. I would frame this in the video as a captain's habit. Before playing with advanced tech, you ensure the basics are well researched, because in the Delta Quadrant, efficiency isn't a luxury, it's survival. This tip of redistributing power manually and using tactical pause is, for me, the moment combat stops being automatic trading and becomes true command. When I start messing with power in the middle of a fight, it feels like I've stepped out of spectator mode and sat in the bridge chair, making small decisions that prevent big disasters. And the tactical pause acts as that second of silence before the order, where you see the board and stop reacting on impulse. In practice, I treat power as a living resource. If the fight starts and I realize a heavy volley is coming, I push more power to shields. If I need to reposition, cut line of sight, or gain distance, I throw it to engines. This is even more important when your weapons go into cooldown and you're in that interval where there's no miracle DPS to save you. So surviving and repositioning is worth more than insisting on attacking the wrong way. Tactical pause is what stitches all of this together, because it's where you avoid the classic mistake of spending everything at once and being left without a response 10 seconds later. I pause, read the situation, decide the goal for the next moments, endure, escape, finish, break shield, and only then redistribute power and choose the next action. It's like playing chess with torpedoes. You don't need to be fast, you need to be precise. And the diplomacy part is my favorite spice, because half of the best victories in Star Trek aren't won on the trigger, they're won in conversation. If you can resolve up to 50% of fights this way, I see it as saving hull, resources, and stress. Plus, maintaining the Voyager tone I like, firm but human. And when this also generates a morale boost, it turns into a good snowball, because high morale makes the rest of your run more stable and gives you the margin to choose battles that are actually worth it. Building multiple labs and offices early on is one of those tips I wish I had followed with more discipline since my first run, because it changes the rhythm of the game. You stop feeling like you're always behind and start dictating the pace of the campaign. When I stack science labs and engineering offices early, it feels like Voyager finally becomes a true research vessel, not just a crew trying to survive from event to event. The trick here is understanding that research points are your invisible fuel. The earlier you accelerate this generation, the sooner you unlock solutions to problems that haven't even appeared yet. This is especially important because, in the beginning, it's easy to spend your attention on combat, resources, and map decisions, forgetting that the strongest snowball usually comes from what you research and unlock. I also like this strategy because it makes future choices more honest. Instead of choosing tech out of desperation because you lack something basic, you start choosing by plan. Then it actually makes sense to think about medium-term goals, like aiming for higher tiers without getting stuck along the way, because your research structure is already set up and you aren't depending on point scraps. Regarding the point about Tier 5 and the Borg tree via Unity in Sector 5, I would treat this as a clear goal for the tip, as it gives direction to players who love planning. Just one caution I always mention. Spamming labs and offices early is strong, but it can't lead to build blindness. I usually build this research base without abandoning minimum sustainability, power, crew, and security, so you don't end up in a scenario where you research fast but get beaten down just as fast. This tip of reducing warp core output and deactivating unnecessary decks is a tired captain's move in the best sense. It's you looking at Voyager and saying, we don't need to be at max power all the time. I really like this approach because it turns resource management into a routine rather than panic. And the game starts to flow with fewer scares between sectors. In practice, I think of it this way. If the warp core is delivering more than your current moment requires, you are literally burning the future due to the anxiety of the present. Lowering the warp core output becomes a way to buy more attempts, more jumps, and more margin for error, especially when you realize that later sectors charge you for every bit of waste you let slide back then. Turning off empty decks follows the same mentality. A lit up ship with no one working is a cost without a return. Whenever I make this adjustment, I feel the game stops punishing me for details and starts rewarding me for planning, because energy and deuterium stop evaporating and become a stockpile that supports more aggressive decisions when they truly matter. I would position this tip as a simple checkup habit before every jump sequence. Adjust the warp core to what's necessary and cut what's idle, as if you were closing doors and turning off lights before leaving home. It's the kind of micro-optimization that seems small, but added up over several sectors, it's exactly what prevents a resource crisis when the game gets more demanding. Here is one of those tips that separate those who finish the game struggling from those who finish with resources to spare. The order of side missions isn't just lore, it's pure unlock mechanics. You know that bad old RPG feeling where you enter a room too early and lose an item forever? That's exactly what happens in Sector 3 if you aren't cold-blooded when choosing your destination. The golden rule I learned the hard way is to prioritize the Jetrel mission before even thinking about touching faces. It might seem like it doesn't matter, but the game hides regenerative fusion technology behind this specific sequence. If you invert it and do faces first, the game assumes the window of opportunity has passed, and you lose access to one of the most useful hull upgrades for the mid-campaign. And the punishment for getting the script wrong doesn't stop at technology, it hits the crew too. Doing this sequence incorrectly blocks essential variants of B'Elanna Torres, and in a game where engineering is the heart of Voyager, losing an optimized version of your chief engineer because of a wrong click on the map hurts the soul. It's the kind of detail the game doesn't warn you about, but charges dearly for later. So, treat the mission log with suspicion. Instead of clearing the map randomly like a shopping list, remember that each side mission can be an invisible prerequisite for another. In the case of Sector 3, hold your anxiety, resolve the Jetrel issue first, and ensure your B'Elanna and your hull are ready for what comes next, because the game won't have mercy on you if your build is incomplete. Anyone who grew up watching Voyager knows the weight of seeing that crew get home, and the game puts that responsibility in your hands in a way few licensed titles manage to execute with this level of commitment. The detail regarding B'Elanna is the most delicate of all. Not splitting her in phases seems like an innocent narrative choice, but it's one of the triggers that defines the path to the canonical ending. Similarly, recruiting 7 of 9 using the Vidian surgical device in Scorpion isn't just a fan reference. It's a mechanical requirement. The game hides behind a decision you might fly past without realizing its importance. If you blink at the wrong moment, you lose 7, and the canon ending is gone. Icheb is another point of attention that catches many by surprise, because the Child's Play mission seems like a quiet side story, but if you don't protect him from pathogens correctly, you're barring another crew member from the ending. The game accumulates these small choices throughout the campaign, as if they were isolated details, but at the moment of truth, they come together to determine if you cross the gateway back to Earth with a full crew or with absences that will hurt. I would treat this tip as a heart checklist. Before every critical mission, ask yourself if this decision preserves someone from the main cast. Tom, Harry, Chakotay, Tuvok, the Doctor, 7, all need to arrive alive at the end. It's not perfectionism. It's the kind of care the show itself always had for these characters, and the game is asking you to do the same. Deleting Borg constructions before the point of no return is much more about identity than strength. It's you looking at your run and saying, all right, I could win with shortcuts, but I want to win the Starfleet way, keeping Voyager consistent with what she represents, even when the game tempts you with powerful power-ups. What I like most about this is that it turns Sector 12 into a test of discipline. Because it's very easy to get attached to Borg efficiency when the campaign gets tough, and suddenly you realize your ship has become a Frankenstein of technology that solves everything through brute force. Deleting these rooms before the no-return point is almost a ritual. You cut the crutch and accept that you'll need to win through planning, crew, and clean engineering. And then there's the practical point many ignore. It's not just don't research Borg tech, it's removing what is already installed that could contaminate the rest of your build. I would do this calmly, looking deck by deck, identifying the Borg rooms, and clearing everything before the final trigger, because once the game crosses that line, there's no use regretting it or trying to revert. For the Starfleet way, this tip fits perfectly as a statement of intent. You are choosing a purer, more faithful, and inevitably more tense path. And honestly, these types of runs tend to be my favorites, because every victory has a different flavor. It feels like you're back to being Voyager, trying to get home with the best the Federation has to offer, rather than just winning through technological absorption. Reaching Sector 11 and facing the Rallic dilemma is the exact moment the game stops holding your hand and asks you point blank, so, what story do you want to tell? Many people freeze here or choose on impulse without realizing that this NPC is basically the master key that defines almost the rest of your campaign. Allying with him isn't just a matter of sympathy. It's a brutal, strategic decision that opens the door to 5 of the 7 possible endings, including the complex hub and hold fast. However, the game charges a high entry fee for this alliance. And this is where you see if your build has consistency or if it was put together by luck. To make this route work and guarantee these endings, you need to come to the negotiating table with weight. We're talking about having 100 export crew and 35 science technology, or throwing caution to the wind and having 400 pure combat power. It's the game testing you to see if you turn Voyager into an ark of survivors or a warship. And without these numbers, the Alliance becomes a huge risk. On the other hand, there's the root of sacrifice, which I find narratively much heavier. Choosing to hand over Relique to seek the for the greater good ending requires a different kind of preparation, because you will have to pass skill checks to challenge Janeway herself. And let's be honest, arguing with the captain on her bridge requires your command and diplomacy attributes to be sharp, otherwise you'll just look like an insubordinate without an argument and lose control of the situation. My personal recommendation: don't arrive at Sector 11 by surprise. Decide a couple of hours of gameplay beforehand if you're going to be the diplomat who welcomes the ex-Borgs or the pragmatic officer who questions orders for the greater good. Look at your ex-Borg, science, and combat numbers now, long before the encounter, because when Rallick's dialogue window opens, you already need to know if you have the capital to back up the choice you want to make. This tip of retrying away missions is that little secret everyone uses, but few admit openly, and I am totally in favor of breaking immersion here for the sake of your sanity. Because, let's be honest, losing an incredible crew member or failing a critical check just because the dice decided to roll low on that specific day is way too frustrating in a long game like this. Reloading becomes a tactical tool to correct bad luck, not to cheat the challenge. I view it as the captain's holodeck simulator. If the mission went wrong, you go back, adjust the strategy, and try again until it's perfect. Especially when recruitment is at stake, like with Arturus, where a wrong dialogue or a failed skill check locks the character forever. You can't play accept fate when fate takes away important run content. And for those seeking that flawless execution achievement, 10 missions without injuries, reloading is practically mandatory unless you have supernatural luck. But the real trick is using this repetition to learn. You see where your comp failed, understand which skill was missing, science, security, or engineering, and return with the team redistributed to cover exactly that hole. So, no guilt at all. If the mission soured, quit and reload. The game is already punishing enough in space combat and resource management. In away missions, you have the right to seek the ideal result. It's the way to ensure your crew returns whole, and that you don't lose hours of progress due to bad RNG. Harvesting everything before advancing a sector is my religion in this game, because Across the Unknown loves to punish you when you try to look cool while rushing without doing your homework. I've done runs where I moved forward thinking I was saving time, and the opposite happened. I arrived in the next sector without enough dilithium, without metal to hold the hull, and then every decision becomes a desperate makeshift fix. When I say harvest everything, I literally mean treating every planet, asteroid, and point of interest as if it were the last safe stop before a storm. Dilithium is usually the bottleneck that decides what you can do on the map. Metal is that silent life insurance that becomes hull when everything goes wrong. And exotic matter is the difference between cool research and research at a snail's pace when you most need tech to stabilize the ship. The anomalies part is where I put on the brakes. I evaluate risk as if I were signing a contract. Artifacts can accelerate your research and put you a tier above what you deserved at that moment. But I only take them when my defense and stockpile are ready to handle the price, because calling a raid at a bad time is the kind of domino that destroys an entire run. It's that very Voyager choice. Curiosity is essential, but survival comes first. And lastly, I treat reading the codex entries as a reward, not a task. When you're scanning and harvesting everything, you end up building the sector story piece by piece. And often that's where the game plants clues that explain plot twists and details that go unnoticed if you just go for the objective. So here's how I do it. I clear the sector like a methodical explorer, and only then read the codex like someone opening a mission report. It's more immersive and honestly, much more fun.